You have to be a brave woman to protest in the streets of Kabul right now. They're calling for their rights to be protected. The crucial question, will this be the same old draconian Taliban just dressed up in a new PR machine? The ruling group said today they will respect the rights of women under Sharia law. Many here don't believe them. The women we've been speaking to inside the country are now too frightened to talk on camera. For a generation of women who have only ever known Afghanistan since the invasion 20 years ago, a culture shock in their own country could await. Those brave enough to leave the house are wearing burqas. Those you can't see are perhaps as much the story here. From the universities to the news channels, reports of women already disappearing from public life. Photojournalist Lindsay Odario has documented life inside Afghanistan over the past 2 decades.
It was a place where women at that time could not leave the house without a male guardian. All forms of entertainment were illegal, so no music, no television. Basic forms of communication like cell phones that we have now didn't exist. It was a very different time. I mean, there were secret girls' schools, educated Afghan women who really couldn't bear to see an entire generation of girls not be educated.
In the dark days of 2001, Syra Shah went undercover beneath the veil for Channel 4's dispatches.
We're trying to uncover the truth beneath Afghanistan's veil.
These now infamous images document the medieval and barbaric treatment of women executed by the Taliban.
I was walking with a burqa on, and beside me another woman and a young girl were beaten by Taliban. It sounds trivial, but there were women running secret beauty salons. I mean, they were risking their lives in order to get together as women, paint each other's nails and put on makeup, and it almost seemed frivolous. It seemed ridiculous. And one of the women said to me, "Look, this is our way of protesting."
Today, the beauty salons of Kabul are already being painted over.
The Taliban have all but closed the country. Most of all, they want to keep out journalists like us.
20 years on, and Syra says the situation in Afghanistan feels eerily familiar.
A generation of women has grown up with possibilities. Some of the girls that I saw learning to read and write have become, scientists and politicians and teachers. And, what will become of them now?
The eyes of the world are now on Afghanistan, their treatment of women under scrutiny. As the UN said, the Taliban's actions must now speak deeper than words.
And as everyone leaves Afghanistan, essentially to the new sort of ruling Taliban 20 years later, what will happen to all those women who have essentially practiced all the values that we promoted and then just bailed?
Well, earlier I spoke with Najla Ayubi, who's an Afghan lawyer, former judge and outspoken women's rights advocate who was ultimately forced to flee the country in 2015. And Kate Clark, a former TV correspondent who now works as an analyst in Kabul. She was evacuated yesterday. I started by asking Ms. Ayubi whether it's possible that the Taliban has changed this time.
Last time when they came, they gave lots of these sort of promises that not for women, but generally for the public, that things will be in the favor of the people. For me, being a judge and fleeing from the country, right now I feel that how this looks like for my fellow, for everyone, for women being in Afghanistan, particularly, and particularly with my fellow hundreds of women's rights activists that I'm closely in touch with them daily, and they're on the ground in Afghanistan, and many of them right now, many of them hiding, fearing of their lives.
So when the Taliban says that, yeah, women could serve in government, and you see the Taliban giving an interview to a female news presenter, is that window dressing? Is it PR, or is there something of substance going on there?
There are lots of stories are coming right now. I will mention that how many of extremist groups from Middle East, Asia, rushing to Afghanistan because they have been promised that they will be giving women and girls like as a property. Also women being dragged and shipped in the coffins to the neighboring country to be used as slaves. Imagine women, families being forced to marry their daughters, young daughters, to the Taliban fighters. How do we feel that on the surface they are saying something and on incidents are happening on the ground differently, totally different?
Kate Clark, you've just come back from Kabul, you've just escaped. What is happening to women there now that you have witnessed and had reports of?
Well, I think, as always, we have rather sweet words from the Taliban on women, and we will judge them by their actions. And not only in Kabul, but also in the provinces. So I think in Kabul, the world's attention is very much focused on the Taliban at the moment and how they're behaving. And we wait now and see how they really act and whether they're, what they're doing in Kabul is also replicated in the places where there's less media attention. So I would draw your attention to certain things. One, this is a movement of men. It is a movement of Sunni Muslim conservative clerics, actually mainly from one, or at least can't say mainly, but the dominating leadership is from one ethnic group, and Pashtuns and Southern Pashtuns. So it's a really narrowly drawn movement. For all Afghans of different ethnic groups and different backgrounds, it's a narrowly drawn background, but particularly for women. So this raises questions for me about who holds power in this new Afghanistan.
Well, Najla, incredibly, you were the first female judge in your home province the last time the Taliban were in power. What kind of hardship did you endure because you'd reached that amazing position?
It's a hard, rocky road, even in a normal society. But like, for instance, for me, I paid a high level of price of losing my father and my brother. Both of them were assassinated because of the support for the women's rights and women's education, and for as retribution for me going abroad and studying. But under the Taliban, it was so hard. I was in a power position when the Taliban came into power. But in the society, I had been put so down and humiliated that I had to pay my neighbor to allow his 4-year-old boy to accompany me to go for my grocery shop.
Because a 4-year-old boy had more status under the Taliban than you did as a female judge.
Exactly.
Kate, when you hear that, just reflect for me on what has changed in the 20 years for women since the Taliban were last in power.
Yeah, so when the Taliban were last in power, and I was living in Kabul at that time, remember the imposed burqa, where women had to cover their faces? This is the symbolic representation that women are private individuals only. They have no public face. They have no public role. I mean, even a 4-year-old boy has more of a public role than a grown woman. This is absolutely key to how the Taliban view women in society. And we will see if they will allow women to have a public face, a public role. Doctors are fine, nurses are fine, but will they be able to be teachers? Will girls be able to go to school, in secondary school, to university? Will we be able to have female politicians? All the things that women have enjoyed, not everyone, but there's been a certain freedom for some Afghan women that they haven't enjoyed before.
I just wanted to ask you finally both to reflect on how the US and UK governments, UN institutions and so on should respond to the Taliban, because we had a UK minister, a defence minister on the programme last night who said that if the Taliban behaved appropriately, they should be recognised internationally as a legitimate government.
Well, I think that isn't there an issue about a government taking power by force? Isn't that an issue for the British government and other democratic powers? Because that's what's happened. I mean, many of the places in Afghanistan may have surrendered. They may have been bloodless, but it was certainly not without violence or menace. This is an army that has taken power, and I think that should be noted very carefully and very, very seriously by our government.
Najla, if the Taliban does deliver on its promises, and that's a very big if, I know, should US and UK governments recognise them as a legitimate government?
I think it depends how they will be behaving on the actual daily life with the woman. Particularly for me as a women's rights activist, I want women to go, like we had 3.5 million girls going to the school in the past few years. now their dreams will be vanished. If they're not allowing them to go, these girls will be, the mothers already fearing that these girls will be sold for slavery. So if the international community is looking into this, that not on the surface, but actually on the ground, any mechanism to monitor and evaluate, if they're doing what they're saying, then probably, but still, I don't believe that this movement could give that what women want.
Najla Ayubi, Kate Clark, thank you both very much for joining us.